Don't compromise quality insurance for savings or your time for this ad. Hit that skip button, or don't, and watch me skip.
You in there? Yes. Yes.
We are farmers. Bum, 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 bum.
Recording in progress.
Me un inalámbrico. Hello, hello. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Y no me tienen que dar un inalámbrico.
Sí, pero no, es solo para probar.
Ok, ok.
Le voy a ver si usted me escucha. Usted es su... Uno, dos. ¿Me escucha, Maga? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Perfecto. Si estás recibiendo piso. 1, 2, piso, piso. Perfecto. Adelante, Valle. 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 1, 2. Piso. El señor Cosí ya se sentó. Acuérdate que él no puede moverse 3 metros de su... Confírmale en qué canal estás.
Español, español.
Good morning. On behalf of the Inter-American Commission of Women of the Organization of American States, it's an honor to welcome you to this event to reflect on one of the most urgent challenges for our democracies and for gender equality, gender disinformation. I want to emphasize that this event is hybrid, and I take this opportunity to greet everyone joining us via streaming. We meet today in the framework of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, a global campaign that urges us to take collective action. We also recently commemorated the International Day of Women Human Rights Defenders, a moment to honor the courage and resilience of women who defend democracy, justice, and equality, often in the face of targeted disinformation and digital violence. Desde la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres y con el apoyo del Gobierno de Canadá,
the OAS, with the support of the OAS, has an ambitious program to strengthen strategic partnerships needed to advance towards gender equality. Since we began in 2023, we've heard from social and political leaders as to their proposals and their concerns. Amongst many concerns, disinformation and gendered disinformation in particular has become a growing threat to the equality agenda. Various multilateral forums, including the OAS, the United Nations, and G20, have warned of its impact on public life, democracy, and human and civil rights. In view of this concern, the government of Lithuania has joined this initiative. We want to today share evidence and key advances by international organizations, civil society, feminist organizations, and think tanks.
Authorities, we will deliver opening remarks. I will invite each of them to the podium individually. First, I have the honor to invite His Excellency Albert Amdim, Secretary General of the Organization of the American States, to deliver his remarks.
Good morning. I wanted to say good morning on this warm and sunny Monday. That's not the case, but nevertheless, welcome. I had a very interesting conversation with the Foreign Minister of Latvia a short while ago about many issues with regard to not only this topic, but also with regard to the relationship between the Organization of American States and Latvia, but also about regional and global challenges which we face today. Very interesting conversation. It showcased how important it is to cooperate globally, internationally, and regionally. I'd like to recognize the Honorable Irma Kalniņa, Member of Parliament of Latvia and Deputy Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Latvia. Ambassador Stuart Savage, Permanent Representative of Canada to the Organization of American States, and thank you very much for Canada's support to this cause. Our distinguished Chairperson of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Thomas Pasquale, and other permanent observers and permanent representatives present, all our participants virtually, the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Alejandra Mora Mora, invited panelists and guests, our colleagues from the Secretariat, good morning, and again, I wish you all a very productive and successful meeting up front. I'm happy that I can join you today as we discuss an issue that is of growing concern to the Organization of American States and to our member states in the hemisphere. Since assuming my role as Secretary General of the OAS earlier this year, I have been clear about the danger of disinformation poses to our democracies. Disinformation is not a new phenomenon. It has been around for centuries. But the advent of social media and artificial intelligence result in a greater degree of disinformation, which harms people and does irreparable damage to institutions and societies. Combating disinformation is not an easy task, as we all know, in part because it requires balancing different rights and principles that are essential in a democracy, including freedom of expression, privacy, and the economic and social security of individuals. Ensuring that these rights coexist in a safe and responsible information environment is a complex undertaking, not only from a legal perspective, but from a norms-based perspective as well. At the same time, healthy democracies depend on well-informed citizens who can participate meaningfully in public debate. Access to information, and by that I mean factual, verifiable, and evidence-based information, is therefore a necessary precondition for democratic decision-making and participation. And yet, some disinformation campaigns directly target our electoral processes. Our Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation has been at the forefront of observing disinformation in elections and addressing the impact of disinformation on elections through awareness raising, training, technical assistance in our own region. The defense of information integrity has also been recognized at the highest political levels in our region, when during the 9th Summit of the Americas, our leaders called upon countering disinformation as part of the Inter-American Action Plan on Democratic Governance. And following up on that mandate, the Permanent Council and the Permanent Mission of Canada organized an ad hoc expert discussion on this issue. I'm glad that we continue to meet to address this subject matter. Today, we are here to examine one of the most pernicious manifestations of this problem, gendered disinformation. The health of any democracy, in our view, depends on the ability of all people to participate freely and safely in public life. Yet, gender disinformation is intentionally designated to erode that foundation. By targeting women and LGBTI persons with false narratives and coordinated harassment, these campaigns seek to further distort harmful stereotypes and biases that aggravate violence in both online and in-person spaces. These campaigns also delegitimize their leadership, narrow the diversity of voices, and ultimately weaken democratic institutions themselves. Countering gender disinformation is therefore both a matter of equality and democratic integrity. In 2022, the United Nations, the OSCE, and the HCPHR, and our own Inter-American Commission on Human Rights issued a joint declaration on freedom of expression and gender justice, which highlighted deep concern over the proliferation of online gender-based violence, gendered hate speech, and gendered disinformation, and its serious impacts on women, in particular women politicians, journalists, and human rights defenders. The practical guide that will be launched today by SIM is a direct response to this call. Developed in collaboration with women's rights organizations from the region, the guide offers practical tips and tools for understanding and responding to gender information. Education, awareness training, reaching out to all groups in society is of critical importance in this regard. This event, as you have heard before, has been made possible by the support of the governments of Latvia and Canada. Canada, Ambassador, has been constant in his support of both the SIM and DECO, funding concrete initiatives to support democracy and equality, including in the face of emerging and evolving threats. We therefore deeply value our partnership with Latvia and with Canada, especially its support for SIM in promoting the empowerment of women in different fields, such as science and technology, as well as advancing the women, peace, and security agenda. I believe that we all will be looking forward to hearing the reflections of all of you, but certainly of the expert panel, and to welcome the concrete recommendations that will help strengthen the response to gender disinformation from the OAS and member states. In conclusion, there's a lot of work to be done, and it will require all of us, independently where we stand, where we are, leadership to address these issues, which, of course, has a gendered element today, but widely speaking, where the whole society will be confronted with artificial intelligence, if it is used in a negative way, and with disinformation. I thank you very much and wish you a very productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. I now invite the Honorable Irma Kanina, Member of the Parliament of Latvia and Deputy Chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Please.
Dear Secretary General, Ambassador Savage, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and virtual guests, thank you for joining us for this launch of this publication. It's a great honor for Latvia as a permanent observer state of the Organization of American States to participate in this very important discussion on disinformation, specifically gendered disinformation, and be among the supporters of the guide we are presenting here today. I would like to extend my gratitude to OAS, and in particular to the Inter-American Commission of Women, for organizing this event and for highlighting an issue that impacts societies across America and throughout the globe. Today, democracies face a growing and deeply interconnected challenge: foreign disinformation, manipulation, and interference. Our countries must work together to detect it more efficiently and effectively, respond more decisively, and impose meaningful costs on malign actors. At this time, we must resist the rise of digital censorship and oppression. The solution to bad information is not less freedom, but more resilience, more literacy, and commitment to truth. Latvia actively promotes information integrity, an online environment that is free, open, and safe, and secure, and resilient to information manipulation through whole-of-society approach, including awareness raising, supporting independent and pluralistic media, implementing media literacy, and initiatives engaging with civil society, and efficient, coordinated, and transparent government communications. A new and accelerating challenge depends on our urgent attention: the impact of artificial intelligence on information integrity. In March of this year, research published by NewsGuard revealed that Russia's Pravda network, also known as Portal Combat, has successfully poisoned 10 leading AI models. These systems now produce responses that repeat Russian propaganda and disinformation in approximately 1/3 of cases. We are particularly concerned about the potential use of AI to interface with democratic elections. We urgently need awareness, tools, and capabilities to address AI-powered manipulative content. Latvia has improved its legal framework and is establishing an AI laboratory in Riga within the NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence, reaching full capacity in 2026. We invite all partners here to follow us and contribute to the work. I'm also proud to highlight a recent achievement from Latvia's private sector. The Latvian company Tilde has launched an open source AI model, Tilde Open, designed for public benefit and information integrity, including smaller language areas. Even as we confront broad disinformation threats, we must address one of the most harmful and targeted forms: gendered disinformation. This form of manipulation targets women to discredit, intimidate, and silence them, discouraging them from entering professions vital to democratic health, politics, journalism, and activism. The tactics are deliberate and devastating. Coordinated harassment campaigns, fabricated content, sexualized attacks, and threats of violence designed to push women out of public spaces. In Latvia, women journalists have faced coordinated harassment campaigns, often from networks spreading Russian disinformation. This is a strategic weaken women's voices to weaken democracy. Women worldwide still face structured barriers in participation, with their voices underrepresented in peace negotiations, transitional justice, and security planning. The participation of women is essential to achieve durable peace. Latvia will continue to insist that women have a seat at the table and their voices are heard and considered in all decision-making processes related to peace and security. History shows that peace is more durable and security more sustainable when women participate fully and meaningfully. The fight for information integrity, and especially the fight against gender disinformation, is ultimately a fight for democracy itself, for women's equal participation, peace, and security, for the societies where truth prevails over fear and manipulation. For Latvia, the principles of women, peace, and security, and the broader goal of gender equality are long-standing pillars of our foreign policy. As Latvia begins to work on the UN Security Council, these issues will remain at the forefront of our agenda. We will continue to ensure that women everywhere have freedom, the safety, and the power to speak and to lead, and we will defend information integrity. Thank you for your partnership in this important work. Now I would just like to say a few words about Canada. I'm very proud that Canada and Latvia are part of this initiative. Canada is the leading brigade in Latvia at this point, guarding the eastern border. So I'm very proud of our partnership in NATO and very proud that we can be together here today. We have outstanding ambassadors, both in Washington, in Latvia, and in Canada. And I think we need to applaud their work. And if you will excuse the fact that I have to leave a little earlier because it's also NATO Parliamentary Assembly time, but I wanted to be here today with you, and I know our minister regrets that she can't be here. If some of you are wondering why I speak American, I will say that my parents were World War II refugees from Latvia, and they escaped the occupation, luckily. My grandparents and all my relatives were deported to Siberia for 17 years in slave labor camps. I was born in New York. Not my choice, but not a bad place to grow up. And I returned to Latvia in 1999 to continue leading. My husband was Latvia's first ambassador to Washington, so I remember this building with great pride at another century. So with that in my heart, I really, really look forward to your results in this tool guide and the fact that perhaps our granddaughters and our great-granddaughters can benefit from what we are doing here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspirational words, Honorable Kalnina. Finally, I invite His Excellency Stuart Savage, Permanent Representative of Canada to the OAS.
Muy buenos días, bon dia. Good morning, everyone. Secretary General, honored to have you here. The departing Member of Parliament from Latvia, Irma Kalnina. Esteemed representatives of the Inter-American Commission of Women for the Americas, SIM, and of course distinguished guests, including of course the chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Pascual. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. I would like to thank the Inter-American Commission of Women for organizing this important and timely event today on gendered disinformation. The spread of disinformation, as the Secretary General so eloquently stated, is a serious challenge for democracies around the world. Deliberate campaigns that spread false information, seek to silence voices, and undermine credibility have flourished in recent years. Moreover, the emergence of digital platforms has had a profoundly transformative impact on the way information is produced, consumed, processed, and circulated. Many of us today turn to social media and digital platforms as a primary source of information both in our private and professional lives. Digital tools have done much good to open spaces for participation, expression, and empowerment, and we should welcome that. Regrettably, they have also facilitated gender-based actions and behaviors that have caused much harm. This includes physical and sexual, psychological suffering, and even the death in some cases of women, adolescents, and girls. Women in leadership, in politics, and in public life are particularly impacted by this disinformation. They face attacks that aim to discredit them, question their competence, and silence their voices through harassment and false narratives. This affects women around the world, in Canada and here in the region. Women with intersecting identities in particular risk being targeted. Gendered disinformation erodes trust in democratic institutions by delegitimizing the voices of women and women leadership. It can also discourage civic engagement and perpetuate inequality in decision-making processes and spaces. Canada is working to advance international discussions on encountering gendered disinformation. That is why we are so proud to support today the SIM through the project Feminist Partnerships to Strengthen the Agenda for Gender Equality. This project aims to empower women and girls in Latin America through cooperation and the building of alliances. It also seeks to strengthen the efficacy of women's rights organizations as well as other key actors in their efforts to maintain and advance gender equality, including in policies, legislation, and initiatives in the OAS member states. Recently, Canada was proud to co-sponsor the declaration Safe Digital Spaces for All Women, Girls, and Adolescents during the Permanent Council's commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, Adolescents, and Girls. The declaration reaffirmed gender-based violence as an attack on human dignity. Human dignity, and also stemming from long-standing power disequilibriums or imbalances, and reiterated the states of the OAS commitment to addressing violence everywhere, including online. If left unaddressed, gender-based disinformation could lead to even more disequal and unfair societies and democracies, where women are less likely to participate in public discourse. We look forward to learning more about the CIM's practical guide and virtual course responding to gendered disinformation during the course of today's discussions. This can serve as a concrete tool in tackling the challenges we're talking about today. I wish you much luck, excellent exchanges, and fruitful discussions. I'm confident that your shared experience will lead to valuable reflections and practical solutions to confront this regional and global issue. Gracias, muito obrigado, merci beaucoup, bonne journée, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Savage. Quiero recordar que tenemos
I wanted to remind you that we have simultaneous interpretation available. Next, we will move on to an introduction that is a frame for the debate of today. First, we will have a video message from Irene Khan, UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Opinion. Their report in 2023 is mythical in terms of refuting some of the disinformation surrounding gender. I would like to ask the technical team to help us out with the video.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'm attacked for being a journalist. Second, I'm attacked for being a woman. Those were the words of Maria Ressa, the 2021 Nobel Peace Laureate. She was describing the orchestrated campaigns of millions of tweets and hundreds of thousands of Facebook posts targeting her in order to intimidate, discredit, and destroy her. 2 years ago, I presented to the General Assembly the first report by this mandate on the subject of gendered disinformation. That report was based on in-depth consultations with civil society and survivors of online violence and disinformation from various regions of the world, including, in particular, the Americas. I have continued my consultations, and the one message that comes across loud and clear is this: that gendered disinformation is rampant, growing, and governments and companies are still not doing enough to address this threat. So I'm grateful for your attention to this important issue, and let me share with you some key reflections from my work. Firstly, gendered disinformation is an orchestrated, coordinated strategy to silence women and gender non-conforming persons. The more visible they are, the more likely they are to be attacked. The aim is to intimidate, silence, and exclude them from engaging in political and public life. Behind those campaigns are powerful state and non-state sponsors who exploit and weaponize existing gender biases, stereotypes, and social and cultural norms based on patriarchal values. The impact is devastating for the individuals as well as for society, eliminating the diversity of voices and views and undermining inclusion and democracy. Secondly, in many countries, public officials and political leaders enable, encourage, and embolden gender disinformation with incendiary, negative, and misogynistic rhetoric. Rather than promoting tolerance, they feed the bias, prejudice, and hatred, and the propensity in many societies to exclude women and LGBTQI LGBTQI individuals. Thirdly, a key enabler of gender disinformation is the business model, social media platforms. Disinformation is a lucrative business, and the dangerous rollback in trust and safety policies and tools of social media platforms recently, and the new innovations in artificial intelligence are only worsening gendered disinformation. Platforms claim they're addressing harmful speech, but the lived experience of women and girls prove otherwise. Now, let me turn briefly to some recommendations. First and foremost, strategies to fight gendered disinformation must be grounded firmly in human rights. There must be no trade-off between women's right to be safe and their right to speak out. Freedom of expression is vital for women's political, social, and economic empowerment. It is also essential for preserving democracy and for promoting the transformative changes that gender justice demands. The blunt tools of censorship and criminalization of speech must be avoided. Secondly, because gender disinformation aims to disempower, states must invest in gender empowerment and agency. That means eliminating the structural and systemic barriers to gender equality. State officials and political leaders especially must set the tone for inclusive public discourse. Thirdly, states must give more priority to closing the gender digital divides and gaps in digital literacy and gender data. Unequal access to the internet and limited digital literacy means women and gender diverse individuals are more vulnerable to disinformation and less equipped to counter it. The lack of trustworthy information on gender issues only increases the risk of gender disinformation. States therefore have a responsibility to proactively correct the information imbalance. Fourthly, companies must abandon the one-size-fits-all approach to disinformation and adopt a gendered lens to their policies and due diligence. They must better understand the local context, improve their content moderation, and make their complaints procedures more gender responsive and accessible to women and gender diverse users. States must use smart regulation to compel companies to confront the dangers posed by their social media business model and the monopoly of big business interests. Finally, states and companies must work with civil society and users groups to develop multifaceted, multi-stakeholder strategies, including especially on the risks created by AI. Let me end by pointing out the many interesting and inspiring initiatives at the community level in Central and Latin America. And as you tackle the subject, I hope you will give them more attention and more support. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and once again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to contribute to your efforts.
Seguidamente escucharemos
Now we will hear from the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Ms. Alejandra Mora Mora, who was not able to join us in person as she is traveling to Brazil to participate in the 10th meeting of the states parties to the Belém do Pará Convention. And she will be discussing, among other things, the model law on discrimination. Ms. Mora Mora wanted to join us, so she's doing so virtually.
Inicio con un saludo al secretario.
I would first like to extend my greetings to the Secretary General Ramdin, and to Irma Kalina from the Parliament of Latvia, and Stuart Savage, permanent representative to Canada, I would also like to extend my greetings to all of those from the permanent and observer missions who are enriching the experience with their presence and participation, to everyone in the Hall of the Americas and those joining us virtually who would like to learn more about gender disinformation. In many countries in the region, right now, at this very time, a woman politician must quiet her voice. A minister or a woman parliamentarian will face resistance for initiatives that she may present to her parliament on eliminating discrimination. They are emotionally abused, or even professors who raise their voices to defend the equality agenda become part of public debate. Women knew that they can be intimidated. Anyone who would support a proposal towards better equality. And this is why it is a direct threat to democratic deliberation and governance, security, and the equality agenda. Disinformation is not new, but it has grown with social networks and artificial intelligence, because these messages get more eyes, and it ultimately silences women's voices and becomes an obstacle in the equality agenda that women have been pushing for thousands of years. It undermines capacities of states to guarantee rights. It weakens gender architecture in all of its facets in terms of moving forward in women's rights, in gender-related institutions, and even public policies that guide our daily lives. An organized civil society which gives legitimacy to the continuity of these processes in the territories. So responding to this is a hard job. We need to protect institutions and safeguard democracy. What we're here to do is shed light on this, to show the impacts and to consider some strategies. From the SIM, we are sharing the practical guide to responding to gender disinformation or malicious information or incorrect information. We have to demand our digital rights. All of this to ultimately hold a virtual course. It's not enough when there is a wave like this to just get angry. What we have to do is we have to turn the current around. We have to be there on the front lines and act with practical tips and effective tools. The entire movement is designed to overwhelm us, but we have to have strategies. We can't improvise. We must coordinate responses, document patterns, care for our teams, and make sure we are safeguarding public mandates, protecting women from gender disinformation, whether they're journalists, teachers, leaders, young women, who are deciding whether to continue to move forward or to quiet their voices, and to guarantee institutions that are sensitive to gender with methods, data, protocols, and above all in the framework of partnerships and coordination. We must protect for the implementation of policies such that institutions are able to provide services locally and ensure that equality becomes possible. We hope these resources the SIM is sharing will help to turn this wave back so that you can have tips and tools to protect democracy, institutions, and firmly support the equality agenda.
Bien, damos inicio ahora a nuestro panel.
Okay, we are now going to have our main panel, which is on reflections on gender disinformation, democracy, security, and equality. I would like to invite the moderator and the panelists up to the stage. Cristobal Fernandez, Chief of the Electoral Technical Cooperation Section of the OAS. We have Lauren Van Metre from Women in International Security. Sandra Chaher, the President of the Asociación Civil Comunicación para la Igualdad. Carla Velasco, joining us virtually from the Association for Progressive Communication, and Hilary Anderson, the Senior Specialist from the Inter-American Commission of Women. And I will now give her the floor as she moderates today's panel.
Morning, everybody, and to those of us that are joining us online as well, a warm good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, to all of you. I'm happy to welcome our panel of experts here, who Flavia has already introduced, so I won't do that again. We'll launch straight into the discussion, which will be organized as sort of a Davos-style conversation. We're going to do rounds of questions. I have one general question for all of the panelists, then a series of specific questions for each of them according to their areas of expertise. We'll start off with the first question. What are some of the challenges that gender disinformation has posed to each of you in your work? And we'll start with Cristobal, if we could. Please feel free to speak in whichever language you're most comfortable in.
Thank you, Hilary. I'll speak in Spanish. Easier for me.
Ambassador Pascual, it's a pleasure. I would start based on the experience from the Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation. One of the main challenges we found recently that is in elections as part of disinformation. We've been talking about disinformation for months. This is something we are seeing. Previously, it wasn't a big problem in elections, but I would say that nowadays it is one of the main challenges we're finding in electoral processes. According to some surveys, many people identify disinformation as one of the main risks, and this is from the past year. This creates a complex scenario because we don't necessarily have responses for how to deal with this. We want to ensure that elections are held in such a way that people can vote, they can come informed to the booth with the voting booth with the most information possible. And then we tie this to gender, and our department, and some of the main topics we are grappling with are technology in elections regionally, and the use of technology for electoral observation. There's a great demand for that. And then the other two topics are disinformation and women's political participation. And we've seen how in the challenge of ensuring women's participation free and without being targets of violence, because we're seeing that increasingly, we're seeing it in particularly on social networks and in digital fora. We're trying to bring both elements together, and on the one hand, we're working on disinformation and then incorporating gender into that. We created a high-level group for promoting women's participation. We want to have recommendations. Thanks to these efforts, we are also addressing disinformation in digital networks. It's very complex. These are new challenges, which I said when I first started out, this was not as big of a problem. And we're here seeing in the surveys that people consider this a problem. Here we can discussed this for DECO. It is very important. We work closely with the SIM. And they are who we turn to when we're looking for recommendations for our electoral observations. And so I truly welcome this initiative.
Something that both women in politics and women in activists have brought to the Inter-American Commission of Women as an issue of increasing concern for them. So I'm glad that we're able to work together in terms of providing them with a concrete response. Lauren, same question, please.
Thank you, Hillary, and I just want to say thank you for the invitation today. I may be a little bit of an outlier organization because I work for an international security institution, and at WISE, we've been focused on the role of gender disinformation as a core operational tool of hybrid warfare because it targets the social infrastructure that democracies depend on: trust, legitimacy, participation, and identity. So if hybrid warfare is the coordinated use of disinformation, cyber operations, political interference to exploit societal vulnerabilities and weaken an adversary from within, it turns out that gender disinformation has been a very powerful but extremely overlooked lever for authoritarian interference in democratic states. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the ways we've seen gender disinformation. Thank you. I hear myself. I had 3 ways that we see gender disinformation being used as a core operational feature of hybrid warfare to strategic effect. There are many ways, but I'll just sort of talk about the 3 main ones. The first is that it weakens democratic institutions. So gender disinformation attacks laws on violence against women, anti-discrimination, and gender rights, labeling them Western colonialism, threats to children, and attacks on the nation. So this undermines the courts, the parliaments, and the human rights bodies that defend and implement these laws. The second way that gender disinformation is used in hybrid warfare is to mobilize foot soldiers. In these new and emerging hybrid wars, we see gender disinformation used to weaponize masculinity to mobilize men. Narrative frames men as the defenders of the traditional order. They create a sense that the nation is under attack, and these narratives are highly linked to mobilization into far-right groups. The third way that gender disinformation spreads in this new form of warfare is what I'll say is through covert operations or psychological operations, which is a military art to change the beliefs and behaviors of citizens. Because these gender narratives circulate through influencers, through religious leaders, through our family members, and lifestyle platforms, they appear to be organic, grassroots, culturally appropriate narratives, but they allow foreign and domestic authoritarians to achieve strategic effect with no visible fingerprints on these operations. So I would argue that gender disinformation is one of the most efficient and destabilizing tools of modern hybrid warfare. It is not only a democracy issue, it's a tech issue, and it is a defense and national security issue. And we must treat it as a multivectoral threat. I would like to say, Hillary, that the guide, I think, was really impressive from that perspective, because in this new form of hybrid warfare, citizens are going to be the front lines of defense, much like the Minister of Latvia described in Latvia. And the guide is a first attempt, a great attempt to build capacity and to build citizen activism in this new front. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I think the national security aspect of disinformation in general and gender disinformation in particular has been overlooked so far, and I think it's interesting to hear your perspectives on that and to strengthen the nexus between democracy and security. Carla Velasco, same question. She's joining us virtual, I believe. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me well? I hope you can do. Please nod if you do. Okay, I see nodding over there. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me remotely. I'm Carla Velasco and I'm part of the Association for Progressive Communications. Very thankful for the invitation to this event and our involvement in the development of this guide, which is very rich in information and provides a deeper look into what gender disinformation is and how it can look like, right? So part of this question is to share about our challenges looking at gender disinformation. APC has looked at gender disinformation for the last couple of years, but we have focused our research and work on technology-facilitated gender-based violence for over 2 decades now. And there is a connection between gender disinformation and technology-facilitated gender-based violence, as gender disinformation is a concrete manifestation of TFGBV, which is the acronym of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So for the last 20 years, we have been advocated for internet policies and regulations to enable expression and protect human rights. But over the last couple of years, we have seen that there is a relation between gender-based violence, hate speech, and disinformation, as they are different challenges that sometimes overlap and that have intersecting areas. They are not the same, and I am very appreciative that the guide shares this in its content, that they overlap, they have intersecting areas, but they're not the same. And the three of them can be used as an excuse to limit expression. And this has been also mentioned by Irene Khan, with whom we have worked with in the past. So what we have seen in the analysis of these three different challenges is that they incite to hate, to discrimination and violence, and we need to investigate more. So one of the biggest challenges has been these differences among these three things: gender-based violence, hate speech, and disinformation, and how we can have a specific definition of gender disinformation, because this is something that we still don't have and we're still working on. So as one of the challenges that I wanted to present here, the second challenge that we have so far is the element of intersectionality, because we have seen that the identities of the people that face gender disinformation is key. Identity plays an important role in why and how people are targeted. And this includes women and people of diverse genders of sexualities, and where they live, in what region they are, and what type of reality they live. So in order to address gender disinformation, we have realized that intersectionality is key. In that sense, one of the things that we have been working on is looking at the issue from different perspectives. And this means not having something that we tend to do, which is having a survivor-perpetrator approach, which is a binary approach. We try to have a more holistic approach of the issue, because when you tend to have a binary approach to the issue, you tend to simplify the problem. So what we're trying to do is go beyond the binary approach of survivor and perpetrator. And in that sense, what we're trying to do is to break with the barrier of looking at the weaponization of violence, as it was stated before. States and protectionist measures are weaponizing violence and placing us women and people of diverse genders and sexualities as victims and as people that cannot defend ourselves, or that we don't have any agency to react in this type of circumstances when we face gender disinformation. So this is where I would end right now, because I know we don't have much time for this question, and I will have more time to bring a deeper approach in the next question. yeah, so thank you for letting me answer this one.
Thank
I'm
you,
going
Carla.
back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Carla, for the nuance that you've brought to our understanding of the issue of gender disinformation and that intervention. And yes, you'll have a little bit more time later in the next round of questions. Sandra Chahed, the same question, please go ahead.
Hola, hola, ¿se escucha bien?
Hello, can you hear me? Well, thank you very much. I'm truly honored to be on the stage here for the launch of this guide. I'm going to read what in gender disinformation is joined a scene that we've been working on in civil society, digital gender violence and hate speech. And since prior to the pandemic and after that, activists for the rights of women and diversity have seen how women's participation in public debate is becoming increasingly different. And then we have gender disinformation. We see this as a deliberate strategy in anti-feminist political movements in public where there is gender prejudice. And these media support gender disinformation. This has subjective consequences in the lives of people who are targeted, but also in society and politics, because gender disinformation is a backsliding of gender policies that we've been pushing in the region, and it directly impacts democracies. Two examples: in 2016 in Colombia, there was a plebiscite on the peace accords. This included a gender portion about differentiated impact on women and LGBTIQ. They emphasized in particular that this was promoting gender ideology, quote unquote. As we know, the majority of the population voted against it. In Argentina in 2023, in the presidential campaign, the current government launched an attack against the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity, saying that they were ineffective and complaining about the budget they were given. This led to the dissolving of that ministry just months later. As we say in the guide, gender disinformation is not just a narrative strategy. It has a true impact on the life of women and different collectives, and this is a threat to democracies.
Sandra, I think we forgot to point out in the introduction that Sandra is actually one of the main authors of the guide that we're launching here today, so just wanted to point that part out. Moving on to the second round, I have some specific questions for each of you. Cristobal, how has gender disinformation impacted elections in general and women electoral candidates in particular?
I'm going to refer back to what I said at the outset. Given the context and the complexities of the phenomenon of disinformation in general, just in general, it's affecting election processes. So it's already a problem. And just disinformation alone is tricky to address. It would be shocking to encounter an observation report that didn't mention it. All the observation missions are mentioning disinformation as a problematic issue in election processes. Now, if to that general problem we add the gender dimension, well, it becomes all the more complex.
No deja de ser.
So it is a major challenge going forward in terms of how it's affecting elections. Now, more specifically, I think it's clear that the disinformation we're seeing as it impacts women in electoral processes, it's very much wrapped up in political violence and political violence against women. And it's interesting, if we talk about political violence, observation missions, and in observation missions, we did an analysis of the phenomenon, which we started to see appear systematically in 2011, and we did a follow-up from 2011 to 2022, and to see what recommendations from these missions were implemented, because there are recommendations such as ones affecting information, quotas, campaign financing, and also violence. And in that period, the recommendations referring to political violence was about 15%, and we had 80% of these recommendations fully or partially implemented. In terms of parity, about those recommendations were about 30%, but the implementation level was at about 35%. So in the realm of political violence, we do see evidence of a deliberate effort to do something to address it, to legislate, to develop protocols, to address the issue, to raise awareness of the issue. Now, that was that period. In recent years, however, the recommendations have become even more prolific. Now, they represent a third of the recommendations issued by observation missions. And there, the most influential issues are disinformation, in particular as a subset of violence. So there, we see disinformation of all the varieties we already know. So presidential candidates are said to not have the ability to govern, perhaps because they weren't or aren't mothers, or the suggestion is made that these women are only in politics thanks to a man. I think we're also seeing the vital role played by civil society in highlighting these issues and collaborating with authorities in addressing the issues. And I think that's a path that must continue to be followed. And I don't want to fail to mention AI, because that is an element that complicates this dynamic even further. I don't remember the name exactly. I think it's IPIE that issued a study this year about the election last year and the use of generative AI in elections across the world in 2024. And there were two interesting points to really process and think about looking forward. One, clearly, is that generative AI is largely being used to create content, videos, etc. About 50%. In about 50% of the cases, it was impossible to verify the origin of that content. So we just don't know where it comes from. And what's more, 20% comes from abroad. So that's another phenomenon of how elections are being influenced or impacted by other countries. Those 2 points alone I wanted to mention because this is an ongoing issue we're going to continue to face. We know that this is going to affect elections. It's going to affect disinformation, women, political violence, all of it heightened by the use of these tools. And just to wrap up my response to this question, I wanted to mention the fact that there's so much disinformation out there already that dishonest actors take advantage of what's happening to then portray truths as false, taking advantage of that whole ecosystem and say that what this person just said, even though it's true, they say it's false. Now, this has been discussed for some years, but it's just happened to me recently. I go to a photo, I see a video, a photo, and I feel that even though in theory I'm looking at something that's true, I'm doubting the truth. And then I look at the comments as to what people are saying about that video or photo to see what others think as to whether it's true or not true. So look at how this is affecting all of us in all these dimensions. And on an emotional level, all of this is having an impact on us, and especially so on women, and it's affecting the equality agenda. And that's another subset of this issue, right? How disinformation is used to hobble the equality agenda. Thank you so much, Cristobal.
Disinformation been used specifically against women in politics?
Thank you, Hillary. Before moving over to the Women in International Security, I worked at the National Democratic Institute, which has been one of the leading organizations on gender disinformation and online violence, specifically against political women and journalists. Their, not the cost campaign, their analysis, et cetera, I think has really moved the bar in some ways. We used to be a peripheral discussion around women, with women in internet rights communities, but you now see, as today, gender disinformation occupying a central space in conversations around the state of our democracy. I think a lot of this focus on political women, women's political participation, you've also seen grow governments and multilateral partnerships that are trying to integrate gender disinformation into frameworks around electoral integrity, around political participation. However, I would argue that a lot of this focus on political women and journalists has really obscured the far broader political harm inflicted on women across civil society. And here I'm going to use an example from Europe and the concerted gender disinformation attacks over the last years on the Istanbul Convention. And the Istanbul Convention is the EU convention to eliminate domestic violence against women. And there have been coordinated attacks in Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Turkey, and Croatia that have reframed this regional convention as a dangerous gender ideology, and in some cases even preventing countries from acceding to the convention or stopping its implementation. And so here I'd like to argue that the framing really did not attack individuals. It systematically reshaped civic space. And so women's rights organizations were delegitimized. They were labeled as foreign agents, and some of their activities were even criminalized. And so faced with this harassment and this legal risk, many NGOs retreated from public advocacy. They continued to provide services to victims of domestic violence, but they pulled out of political coalitions. They stopped offering their voices in public debate. And it had an even greater ripple effect, impacting everyday women. So survivors of domestic violence stopped coming for services. They sensed the threat against these organizations. And they themselves faced further stigma and isolation for attempting to remedy their situation. So I'd just like to end by saying that we really need to extend the monitoring of gender disinformation to the local level, provide protection and resourcing to grassroots women's organizations. We really need to start in on narrative campaigns that not only defend women's rights, but promote women as legitimate civic and political actors in this space. So clearly these attacks are meant to close the political space for women. Then our response must be equally intentional in keeping that space open, visible, and contested. So.
Thank you, Lauren, for your, particularly the reflections on the Istanbul Convention, because here in the Americas, we've seen a lot of the same attacks against our own Inter-American Convention on Violence Against Women as well. Carla, moving on to you and your specific question, how has gender disinformation impacted activists for women's rights and gender equality?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Lauren, for this very important intervention that you have shared right now. For women that are on civil society as activists and doing work on the ground, the panorama has changed quite a lot over the last decades. APC has been working with women advocates and people of diverse genders and sexualities for over 20 years, like I said before. And initially, the internet was this space where we could go to, we could express ourselves, we could build communities, we could build connections, and even if we had authoritarian governments or we were facing very strong patriarchal values in our societies, there was this space where we could meet each other and raise our voices, amplify our thoughts and our ways of accessing the information on gender and sexuality. And what happens now is that this same infrastructure, this internet where we navigate, is now is now a place of violence. It's now a place of judgment. It's now a place of harassment. And initially, when we had the support from many social media companies that were there, amplifying the voices. When Twitter started, it was a very important space for many activists. And now look where Twitter is at now, right? So the panorama has changed a lot. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing. Authoritarianism has different faces, and it's not only on governments, but it can also be present in the face of big tech platforms. And going back to what I was sharing before on the first question, looking at how gender disinformation affects among different regions, we have seen in the research that we have done with our different partners and associates is that, for example, in Asia, much disinformation lies at the intersection of gender and religion and caste. In Africa, the narrative of family protection is reportedly strong. And for example, women politicians, journalists, and defenders are portrayed as attacking family values in the Africa region. In Latin America, it was already shared before, but women and people of diverse genders and sexualities are targeted in the midst of narratives that are preaching dangers of gender ideology or feminism. And even in Eastern Europe, LGBTQ+ groups have highlighted the links between geopolitics and gender disinformation, with campaigns that are centered on the risks that are posed on Western values and as a threat to the nation and national security, as Lauren shared before. So as you can see, the different ways of living gender disinformation among the different regions and among the different contexts. And of course, it intersects, with caste, race, gender identity, sexual identity, economic background, social background, and all of that has an impact on activists and women's rights and gender equality. We have been doing some research with women human rights defenders that include LGBTQAI+ activists, indigenous rights defenders, Black, brown, and environmental women human rights defenders who have been particularly targeted. And the impacts that they have shared with us is silencing and shadow banning, algorithmic suppression that limits the visibility of the rights of defense of online content, coordinated disinformation campaigns that distort their messages and damage their credibility. They also shared how they have impact. It has an impact on their mental health and physical well-being. They face stress, burnout, panic attacks, feelings of hopelessness, persecution, collective exhaustion. They also face distrust in community and networks. The defamation campaigns and the spreading of fake news question and delegitimize their work. They also face economic disadvantage because some of them face digital violence that limits their financial independence. There are women human rights defenders that rely on online platforms for their work. And when they're silenced or they are forced to be offline, they have a cutting of their income. And sometimes they erase the entire work online. Also, on the offline side of impacts is impunity and normalization of violence, and the undermining of collective actions and democratic institutions, which includes the lack of judicial accountability and the legitimatization of the work. So I'm going to stop here, and thank you.
Thank you, Carla. To end this round of questions on a slightly more positive note, and because Sandra conducted focus group discussions and interviews with women's rights organizations in the preparation of this guide, could you tell us a little bit more about how women's organizations have already been responding to gender disinformation and what are some of the challenges that they face in that response?
Sí, gracias. Bueno, en todo...
Thank you. In all of our countries, there was an immediate response to gender disinformation against digital content creators and parodists and journalists. But journalism is in crisis now. It's not profitable now. And so those who are working in the field are having to take on other jobs because the pay is so ridiculously low. And those working in feminism are suffering because of the anti-feminist movements. The diversity agenda had gotten into mainstream media, but we've seen very quick backsliding in recent years as political forces are gaining ground in the parliaments of our countries and media adapt to the new times with self-censorship. In Argentina, there's almost no gender editors. We had seen 13 before that. Most media outlets eliminated columns of women that cover gender and diversity issues, and alternative media outlets or community and cooperative outlets in our region, which tended to be more sensitive to this agenda, are now in suffering a funding crisis as funding for this type of work began to be removed at the urging of the U.S. in 2025. Lies about the gender and diversity agenda are being spread, and so their firepower is reduced. Organizations across the region have responded by documenting the attacks so that they can be recognized. Only in this way can they be countered. We just finished compiling information on 4 gender disinformation campaigns in Argentina. Well, 3 were gender specific. 1 was more general, all initiated by the government, once against feminism and diversity groups through the associating them with pedophilia, another with a law on abortion, another one on involving a porno deep fake on a high-profile woman, and another on journalists. And all of this undermined the work. But we've been systemizing and documenting the attacks, trying to understand the goals, which is the most important thing. As we understand it, gender disinformation is part of broader attacks that include other violent strategies like gender-based hate speech and digital attacks, as referred to by Carla, meant to silence voices, distract from general problems, and seek to really transform the idiosyncrasies of our societies, trying to break the consensus we'd achieved on gender equality and human rights, and naturalizing differences, trying to make gender and race differences seem normal. And it's going to be much easier to repress groups. And we are now seeing increasingly unequal societies with inequality rates, the likes of which we hadn't seen in decades.
General question for all of our panelists, but I'm going to switch the order and begin again with Sandra. Looking to the future, what recommendations would you make, and they can be to governments, to media organizations, to women's rights organizations, or to the OAS, to strengthen the response to gender disinformation, and ideally move more to a focus on prevention as well? Sandra, go ahead.
¿Empiezo yo con la última? Bueno.
I get to start? Very well. Disinformation is combated with true information. In that sense, the priority objective in fighting the phenomena is to support women journalists. This can be done through government subsidies to feminist media outlets. Governments and their leaders specifically should refrain from disseminating disinformation about women and those representing the LGBTQ plus community. It seems shocking that we'd have to say it, but it has to be said. The media, in turn, need to give value to the gender and diversity agendas and include those topics. Media really play a special role in these cultural battles. So as we've always said, be committed to equality and transformation, because societies today are very different from what they were 50 years ago, despite the political forces trying to return to traditional times. Media should continue to have a rights-based focus. The human rights system is under attack, as is its framework for understanding reality. But despite improvements that could be made in implementation, the best tool are those that create a more just society, and the digital platforms need to be committed to meaningfully attacking disinformation, specifically gender disinformation. What we're seeing now is that there's an insufficient response and that they're dismantling the mechanisms to monitor these problems. We don't know how algorithms work, and it seems that disinformation is being spurred to improve profits. We're seeing multiple groups being targeted and made vulnerable, and so it's important to have a commitment across society to combating disinformation. All of us can stop disinformation if we stop and think every time we are exposed to something that is meant to incur our rage. Every click, every decision we make in digital environments matter. Thank you very much.
Carla, with the same question, please, your recommendations.
Thank you. And I'm going to start with the recommendations for social media platforms and big tech accountability, because we know that this is one of the biggest issues that we have right now, including the use of generative AI for gender disinformation. We have been working with big tech companies for a while, and like I said before, at the beginning, it was a good way of working with them, because we really get to influence some of their methodologies and practices to address online gender-based violence, for example. But now the approaches that they're taking, they are not enough. They do provide consultations with civil society and advisory councils, and back then they were representative and there was engagement. But these consultations with civil society are becoming more and more inexistent. So we need to work on that. on implementing different ways of working together with them and also with member states in order to take a look at the issue. The transparency reports that they provide, they have a lack of clarity and they don't include disaggregated data that could be useful for the solution of the problem. What happens to freedom of speech is something that we need to take a deeper look at, because when we address gender disinformation, what happens is that people that are facing gender disinformation are often silenced, and we have a lack of freedom of speech. The reporting tools and content moderation tools are not enough, and we need to have a better regulation on content moderation. And including that, we have been pushing for a new approach together with UN Women and UNFPA, which is called Safety by Design and Privacy by Design, which means that when the new technologies are created, safety by design and privacy by design should be at the center of the development of the technologies. So this is just for big tech platforms and how they are addressing gender-based violence. In terms of what can member states do, I think that the previous panelist shared a wide list of what member states could do, and I don't want to repeat, but this includes looking at a better approach to justice and not relying on over-criminalization for addressing gender disinformation. And in terms of civil society and how we are addressing the issue, what I would emphasize on, and to end my participation on this, is to keep the focus on the survivors, to keep the focus on the redressal mechanisms and how we can amplify the voices of the people that have faced this issue, and how we can place them at the center for them to provide us the the most holistic solution to the issue. And yes, I'm gonna stop here in order for others to continue and provide
Thank you,
the
Carla.
responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Lauren, same question. Your recommendations, please.
So again, I'm going to come at this as an international security organization. And I would argue that one of the things that the OAS can do is also frame gender disinformation, not just as a women's rights concern or democracy concern, but as an issue of hemispheric security and defense. I would say that the OAS can convene multi-stakeholder gatherings across the democracy, technology, and security communities for a more comprehensive understanding of the strategies on gender disinformation. And I say that because there's gaps right now between those communities. The open internet community understands the platforms, the algorithms, but they treat gender disinformation as an online safety issue, and they miss the power dynamics, frankly. The security community sees the adversaries, they see the influence operations, they see the information warfare, but they have not seen or analyzed how gender is instrumentalized in these approaches. The democracy community, I would argue, sees it all. They see the impact on power and participation, but they need to access the tech and security countermeasures. I think early warning, hard deterrence strategies, platform leverage. And so by bringing these communities together, I think we could develop a more comprehensive and coordinated approach, much like our adversaries have done. The second thing I'll argue for is that the parliamentarian from Latvia also mentioned women, peace, and security. So this is Resolution 1325 that calls for more women's participation in peace, but also in security. Security is often the conversation left out of the women, peace, and security agenda. And I would argue that the WPS architecture in the region is pretty robust, and it's in place to prevent and protect societies against violence. It can be activated on gender disinformation, given that gender GD is an enabler of political violence, and it's a coercive tool to exacerbate internal and societal conflict. So I would argue that the 4 pillars of WPS could be reframed and activated on gender disinformation. Prevention, setting up early warning systems, because these narrative movements often are precursors to violence. Protection, establishing rapid response teams with legal advice, trauma prevention, security protection for women. It has been proven that when these rapid response teams are in place, and women are more likely not to remove themselves from political space and to re-engage. Participation, women engage clearly in this study in the analysis and lived experiences of GD and must be part of these solutions and strategies and remedies. And then finally, recover, the 4th pillar of WPS, which I would focus again on trauma recovery. So WPS fits nicely into this agenda. There's already an existing architecture in the region, and I would say that this community needs to be deeply engaged.
Thank you, Lauren. And finally, Cristobal, your recommendations as well, please.
All of the recommendations and that lead to or help to prevent women from being afraid of participating in political life. Great efforts, cross-sector efforts are required. There are components about how to share information, have standard methods of doing so. For example, it's impossible to combat disinformation in silos. So this requires multi-sector approaches. In the elections, all of those who are involved in combating disinformation, it's electoral authorities, the state, civil society, political parties. Clearly, awareness raising. It's not clear. We don't have a clear definition of what gendered disinformation is. So we need awareness raising. And people who work on these, there is work being done by many organizations, and they've been doing it for some time. A number of them address the matter of gender, but we have to take that extra step. And when we're dealing with elections, we see that you have to do fact-checking. We have to raise funds, engage people. It's a matter of continuing to work. And sometimes when we're talking about disinformation, we fail to consider the part of social cohesion. In more fragmented societies, it's easier for disinformation to be fed, to grow, and this worsens the discrimination, the fragmentation. There's a case that doesn't have to do necessarily with gender disinformation, but in the Dominican Republic, in elections, there was audio from the president that was true. It seemed true. You could believe it. And it started to spread on social media. And one of the main opposition candidates, when asked about the audio, he said that there's no way that that's true, and we are not going to engage in our campaign using fake information. But that, in many cases, an opposition party would run with it. So it's important to keep this discussion going and think of it not just as a phenomenon, but look at the root causes, how it develops, particularly aspects like this.
Thanks for sharing your expertise and your insight into this issue, and also for respecting the time. I'm going to open the floor to questions, comments from our participants, but I'll hand the floor back to Flavia briefly so she can queue up a brief excuse me, a brief video we have presenting the guide that we're launching today. Flavia, go ahead, please.
Muchas gracias, Hilary. Bueno.
Thank you, Hilary. This is just a very brief presentation of the guide. On your seats, you have an executive summary of the document we're launching today. You're able to download it through the QR code. And as the panel has already noted, it has many very practical tools. So we hope you will download it and take a look at all of its content. So please go ahead with the video.
Nos está faltando el sonido.
Unfortunately, we're not getting the sound.
Bueno, mientras tanto.
Well, while we're waiting, let me take advantage of your patience and say that beyond the guide, in January, we will be launching an online course on gender disinformation. We will offer practical, deeper and more detailed strategies and tools than the guide. That will begin. It will be on the educational portal of the Americas. We invite you to stay tuned for messages from the SIM about how to sign up for and participate in the course. It's geared toward women who are targeted by these disinformation campaigns, but it's also to learn about gendered disinformation as well as some strategies of how to react. I wanted to share that brief announcement. Okay, I'm being told that there's still a technical glitch.
Okay, excellent. My friend Annabella Sanvario from Parlaméricas, I think, had a question or a comment. Please go ahead first. Microphone floating around somewhere.
Muchas gracias a todos.
And thank you, everyone. As Hilary said, I'm Annabella Girales. I am from Parlamericas, which is an interparliamentarian institution in the Inter-American system. So I'm going to be asking a question about parliaments, knowing that parliaments can help to prevent gender disinformation through its functions, political control, or through internal institutional mechanisms that have a gender perspective. So what legislative mechanisms or best practices would you recommend for parliaments to adopt to address this issue? And I have a second question. What internal measures could be taken to guarantee full participation of women parliamentarians, understanding that they have been victims of gender disinformation?
Any more comments, if anyone else has anything they'd like to ask? Or not? Okay, then I'll throw it open to anybody from the panel, including Carla, who would like to answer that question about legislative measures to respond to gender disinformation and the protection of women parliamentarians. Sure.
Gracias.
Yes, great, thank you. There are a few ideas that come to mind. There was a specific case. I mentioned one of a feminist journalist during my presentation. When that situation occurred, the parliament responded very quickly. In that investigation, we talked about resistance, what civil society as a whole did. I'm including political parties there, to grapple with that situation. There was a bill for protection of journalists that was already being deliberated. And then there was a public act with a resolution in which members of parliament from all different political stripes, except the party in power, that was a specific activity, and it had very significant impact on Argentinian society. There was political commitment to address the attack against this journalist. So there were draft bills, all of that was important. And as Irene Khan said in her presentation, no bill, draft bill, should in any way undermine freedom of expression. So you can't bias this, because we've seen some that seek to curb freedom of expression. And then in parliaments, you have to be able to promote debate on this, sustained debate, and research. There has to be research and investigation and when cases arise.
Weigh in on this? You don't have to. Sorry, I forgot the interpretation. Legislative measures to address. Anabela Cerveña works with Parlamericas, which is an organization that brings together parliamentarians from the region. So she was asking about potential legislative measures to respond to gender disinformation and also to protect women parliamentarians.
I would say not legislative measures, and I don't know if you mentioned this, apologies, I didn't bring my interpretation, but I think there's an increasing role for political parties in this, that women candidates cannot just be left alone to manage the security measures on their own, and that political parties must commit to security assessments, they must commit to all sorts of measures to protect their candidates. And then I think one of the other things that I know at NDI we were doing, and again, it's not a legislative measure per se, but it has a huge impact on legislatures, which we were really moving towards broad narrative campaigns that legitimized women as political leaders and political actors. So national narrative campaigns, and I'll just talk a little bit about the one in Ukraine that we launched, that after the 2014 Russian operations in Ukraine, we noticed that women were becoming greater civil society leaders, huge players in the military and in local governments, but they still hadn't been able to break the legislative barrier. and get into parliament. So I think one of the things that helps as well there, we did a national campaign that women are 50% of Ukraine's success. And that really saw a boost in women running for office, confidence in running, as well as significant numbers of women achieving political office, around 20% more achieved presence in the legislature. I'm sure you mentioned all the regulatory, but there are some things as well that can influence legislatures. So.
It's a difficult question, and in terms of the legislative branch, regulating information as such is something complicated, and complicated when it comes to inclusion. In gender disinformation, beyond approaches to it, and this is something that we've seen in the context of political violence, what efforts exist to punish certain conduct. We've seen varied situations, different parameters, and it's unclear if there's proportionality in terms of punishing certain conduct over other. In legislative regulation on how to address disinformation is complex. There are some countries that are ahead of the game, and now it is controversial. It remains controversial. Artificial intelligence, of course, is going to add to that complexity because it requires other types of regulation. So even if it's not necessarily in the legislative branch, there are other institutes of government that could do it. For example, election-related organizations which implement measures. They're not necessarily regulations, but they do implement measures. May I add something? Well, it's something Cristobal said before, and it occurred to me that a few years ago in Uruguay, and again, I think in both cases it was a commitment by political parties to not disseminate disinformation. And I think the same happened in the Dominican Republic this year, because this is something that parliaments can do. There can be multi-sector, multi-party agreements in election years that they will not disseminate misinformation.
Against gender disinformation. I think parliaments have a role to play in creating and strengthening an enabling environment for responding to gender disinformation as well, in terms of encouraging digital media literacy, including these issues in basic education curricula, and just generally better preparing people. I think maybe it's more of a positive role than a negative role, but I think it's important to highlight that. I'm getting thumbs up from our technical team now, so I think the video is ready to go. And before we cue that, I just wanted to point out that the video was actually made with artificial intelligence, and that it's one of the areas of work for the SIM over the next year or so is to work with women's rights organizations and provide them with tools and training in terms of increasing their capacity to use AI to support their own advocacy work, so that we can start to enjoy some of the benefits of AI instead of just dealing with its negative consequences. And in addition, all the recommendations that you all have shared with us here today will be systematized in kind of a working roadmap for the SIM over the next couple of years as we continue to delve deeper into the issue of gender disinformation and trying to counteract it. And Cristobal wants to add something.
Sí, respecto de eso.
Yes, I think it's important. This is something we didn't talk about in political participation. At the end of the day, social media can be a very important tool in a world where political campaign finances and women, we know, face difficulties because the resources are in the hands of people and parties that limits their access. And so the capacity to reach people, in some workshops that we've held, we've talked about the importance of just not fearing the use of these tools. So besides everything else we've discussed, we have to remember that this is a very powerful tool for politics and political life, and it has to be used.
Back to Flavia for some brief closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Bueno, sí, me dijeron que el video.
Yes, I was told that the video's ready. I would like to add into this last round of proposals and recommendations the importance of empowering and facilitating communication teams. And here I would like to thank the Sims communications team that worked on this video that we are now going to be screening for you. I'd like to thank the technical team, the protocol team, Maria Vicencia, who has been helping us with all of the logistics for the event, and of course, the entire SIM team that was a part of this. Now, please screen that.
Flooded our digital spaces. It circulates fast, confuses, divides, and often hurts. But there is one form of disinformation that is particularly damaging to our societies: gender disinformation. It is not just false data, it is the intentional dissemination of content that attacks individuals or groups because of their sex or gender identity. A phenomenon that is intertwined with digital violence and hate speech, which seeks to silence, sow fear, and curb the advances won by the feminist movement. For women, its effects are profound. It reinforces discriminatory stereotypes, discourages public participation, erodes trust in institutions, and discredits the equality agenda. We can all be victims, and also channels of disinformation, even unwittingly. That is why we need tools that allow us to act with security, clarity, and strategy. The Inter-American Commission of Women, with the support of the governments of Canada and Latvia, presents the Practical Guide to Responding to Gender Disinformation, a tool designed to strengthen our capacity to recognize, confront, and transform it. The guide walks us through the process, from training and developing critical thinking to learning how to verify the information we receive and properly document any attacks. It also invites us to create feminist counter-narratives, to denounce in the appropriate channels, to sensitize those who share erroneous information, and, above all, to build support networks that care for and strengthen us. This guide is an ally for action. It reminds us that, in the face of misinformation, we are not alone. That taking care of ourselves also means taking care of our digital health, and that responding collectively transforms digital spaces into safer and fairer places. Download the complete guide. Learn how to respond to gender disinformation strategically.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Okay, we will now conclude. We are convinced that gender disinformation is one of the most urgent issues of our times. As we heard from our panelists, from the authorities, it goes beyond digital spaces and impacts women's political participation, freedom of expression in the region. On behalf of the SIM, we would like to thank you all for joining us on this very cold morning in Washington, D.C. Those of you who came out to join us are very brave, and we recognize that. We do this. We want to make sure that a future with equality is possible. I would hereby adjourn this event, wishing you a great day, and my thanks to the panelists and to Hillary for moderating.
In recent years, misinformation has flooded our digital spaces. It circulates fast, confuses, divides, and often hurts. But there is one form of disinformation that is particularly damaging to our societies: gender disinformation. It is not just false data, it is the intentional dissemination of content that attacks individuals or groups because of their sex or gender identity. A phenomenon that is